a satellite spotted an empire hiding under 400,000 square kilometers of Saharan sand, an entire civilization. And until that moment, almost no one knew it was there. You are looking at the Fezzan region of Libya. It's one of the most punishing environments on the planet. For 2,000 years, history had a simple story for this place. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote about a tribe of untamable, nomadic raiders who lived here. He called them the Garamantes. A footnote, a primitive nuisance on the edge of a real empire. But the satellite saw something else. It didn't see a temporary camp. It saw the ghost of a metropolis. And here's where the official story begins to completely fall apart. The images revealed the faint outlines of more than 150 fortified settlements. We see castles, villages, and dense urban centers. Think about what that means. You don't build a castle for a weekend raid. You build it to protect a kingdom. The history books tell you that large-scale civilization was impossible here, but the ground tells a very different story. A team led by archaeologist David Mattingly confirmed the satellite data. They found cities with populations in the tens of thousands. They found a written language. They found evidence of a powerful centralized state that lasted for nearly 1,000 years. So how did they do it? How do you support a city in a place that gets less than 10 millimeters of rain per year? The answer was also visible from space if you knew how to look. The satellite picked up thousands of dark spots on the desert floor. They were the collapsed remains of an ancient and ingenious network. A system of underground tunnels, a foghora, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. These weren't raiders. They were master hydrologists. They were mining fossil water, ancient rainfall trapped deep beneath the sand for millennia. This was a civilization that bent the Sahara to its will, a silent rival to Rome, built on water that shouldn't exist, in a place where life was considered impossible. The Romans claimed they eventually subjugated and scattered them. But the satellite images suggest a kingdom far too vast and sophisticated to be a simple Roman conquest. So if Rome didn't destroy them, what did? What did? The answer wasn't an army. It wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was something fairer, more patient, and it came from directly beneath their feet. The very source of their power was also a clock, ticking down to zero. To understand their fall, you first have to understand the miracle of their rise. This wasn't just a kingdom. It was a hydraulic empire. The satellite images showed you the ghosts of their canals, the foghora. But seeing them from space doesn't prepare you for the reality on the ground. You're looking at a network of over 750 kilometers of tunnels, dug by hand, through sandstone and treacherous, shifting soil, all in near total darkness. And here's the part that scientists still struggle to explain. To work, these canals had to be angled at a precise, almost flat gradient. Too steep, and the water erodes the tunnel. Too shallow, and it doesn't flow at all. The Garamantes achieved a slope of just 1 to 2 meters for every kilometer of tunnel, an engineering feat that would challenge modern surveyors with laser equipment. They did it with rope, bone, and fire. This precision allowed them to tap into the Nubian sandstone aquifer, a vast underground sea of fossil water trapped during a wetter, greener age thousands of years before. They didn't just find water in the Sahara, they were mining time itself. But this level of construction requires a massive workforce, tens of thousands of people working for generations. Official records on this are conveniently silent. So who was doing the digging? Think about their reputation. The Romans called them raiders, and they were right. The Garamantes powered their economy with slave raids deep into sub-Saharan Africa, south of the Niger River. They brought back thousands of captives. This is the part of the story nobody likes to talk about. The beautiful green oases, the bustling cities. They were all built on the backs of enslaved people. Their hands bled digging those tunnels. Their lives were spent in the dark so that a kingdom could live in the sun. It's a brutal calculation. The lives of thousands traded for the survival of a civilization. And that civilization was spectacular. Their capital, Garama, now modern Jerma, was no simple desert outpost. At its peak in the 3rd century AD, it was home to over 10,000 people. The city had temples, Roman-style baths, a thriving market. They traded ivory, exotic animals, and gold with the Roman Empire. They were not a footnote to Rome's story. They were a rival, a wealthy, powerful, and utterly self-sufficient state. For nearly a millennium, they had solved the puzzle of the Sahara. But the water they were mining was a finite resource. It wasn't being replenished. Every bucket of water pulled to the surface was one that would never return. The aquifer was like a bank account with no deposits, and the Garamantes were spending it lavishly. For 1,000 years, the water level dropped .lie, imperceptibly at first, a few centimeters a century, then a meter, then more. As the water table fell below the level of their tunnels, the fogaras began to run dry. First the highest ones, then the ones further from the source. The green fields turned back to brown dust. The kingdom began to shrink. So the official explanation is that their system simply failed. A inevitable decline caused by their own success. But recent climate data and archaeological evidence suggest a more complicated story. The kingdom's final collapse around 400 AD seems too rapid, too sudden for just a decline. It happened faster than the models predict. So did the water just run out? Or was it pushed? The water didn't just run out, it was pushed. But the force that pushed it wasn't an army. It wasn't a single event. It was the sky itself. Around the year 350 AD, the climate of North Africa began to change. Violently. The stable warmth of the Roman climatic optimum, a period of predictable weather that had lasted for centuries, was over. Think of it like a thermostat for the planet suddenly breaking. The already scarce rainfall became wildly unpredictable. One year, a flash flood that could destroy a canal network. The next 5 years, absolute drought. How do you feed a city of 10,000 people in that world? You don't? And here's the part the climate models often miss. The Garamantes' biggest customer was going broke. Their entire export economy was built on selling luxury goods to a single, massive client: the Roman Empire. By the late 4th century, Rome was a shadow of its former self. Civil wars, collapsing finances, and invasions from the north had shattered its economy. Suddenly, nobody in Rome was buying ivory, gold, or exotic animals from the middle of the Sahara. The demand for their goods vanished. But the most dangerous threat wasn't in Rome or in the clouds. It was right under their feet, in the tunnels. Remember the massive enslaved workforce? The thousands of people who dug 750 kilometers of channels by hand? Their survival depended entirely on the kingdom's ability to provide food and water. And the kingdom was failing. Archaeologists have found evidence of hastily built walls, not on the edges of the cities, but inside them. These weren't for foreign invaders. They were for internal threats. They were walls built by the rich to protect themselves from the starving poor, from uprisings, Think about what that means. The very foundation of their society, the forced labor that built every field and every castle, was turning against them. This is the part of the story that gets conveniently left out. A foie gras is a fragile miracle. It demands constant back-breaking maintenance. Every single day, teams had to descend into the darkness to clear the sand and silt that trickled in. Stop that work for a single season, and a tunnel begins to choke. Stop for a year, and it's lost forever to the desert. With no food from the fields and no money from Rome, the state lost its ability to control its labor force. The maintenance stopped, and the Sahara patiently began to reclaim its own. The textbook story usually ends here. It says the Garamantes simply disappeared, a mysterious lost civilization swallowed by the sand. It's a romantic story. It's also completely wrong. They didn't disappear. In fact, you may have seen their descendants. When the cities failed, the people didn't lie down and die. They adapted. They scattered. They returned to the oldest way of life in the desert: nomadism. Genetic and linguistic evidence suggests they became the ancestors of the modern Tuareg people, the legendary masters of the Deep Sahara. And here is the final dark irony. The Roman historian Tacitus first described them as untamable nomadic raiders. For 1,000 years, the Garamantes built a magnificent settled empire to prove him wrong. But in the end, to survive its fall, they had to become exactly what their enemies had always claimed they were. They had to become what their enemies always claimed they were. But this wasn't a simple return to an old way of life. Imagine watching 1,000 years of your history, your temples, your homes, your ancestors' graves, disappear under the sand. This wasn't a choice. It was an amputation. And what do when the world you built is gone? You walk away from it. You have to. The skills of the city were now useless. The knowledge of hydrology, of statecraft, of trade with Rome, all worthless. Survival now depended on a different kind of knowledge. The language of the stars, the subtle taste of water from a hidden well, the memory of a path that exists only in your mind. These are the skills of the nomad. They didn't just become Tuareg. They reforged themselves in the furnace of their own empire's collapse. For decades, this connection was just a theory, a compelling story. But many historians dismissed it. They preferred the tidy narrative of a civilization that simply vanished. And here's the part they can no longer ignore. In 2017, a team led by geneticist Stefania Sarno analyzed mitochondrial DNA from ancient Garamantian remains. They compared it to modern populations. The results were undeniable. The analysis revealed a direct, unbroken maternal lineage connecting the bones buried in those ancient cities to the Tuareg people living in Libya today. Yes, read that again. It's not a story. It's a biological fact written in their DNA. The echo of the empire is in their blood. Think about what that means in practice. You can hire a Tuareg guide today, a man named Musa, perhaps. And as he leads you through the ruins of Garama, he isn't just showing you a historical site. He is walking through his own family's history, separated by 50 generations. The official records are silent on so much of their daily life. The textbooks stop at the fall of the cities. But Musa's grandmother told him stories. Stories of a time when the wadis ran with water. Stories of great queens and powerful kings who commanded the desert. These aren't myths. They are oral history passed down in the dark of a tent, a library of memory that survived when the stone cities did not. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. Since the Libyan conflict erupted in 2011, these sites are almost completely unprotected. The work of David Mattingly's team had to be abandoned. The ghosts first spotted by a satellite are now being erased on the ground, not by the movement of sand, but by looting, neglect, and the crossfire of a modern war. Why does no one talk about this? An entire chapter of human history, a testament to African ingenuity, is being allowed to crumble into dust. The descendants of this empire are now refugees in their own ancestral land. The Tuareg are caught between warring factions, their nomadic routes cut by checkpoints and minefields. Their very survival is once again in question. The story of the Garamantes is not just about the past. It's about a culture fighting for its life, right now. And it leaves you with a deeply unsettling question. The last generation of elders who hold the oral histories, they are disappearing. What if the final key to understanding this empire, the one detail that explains everything, exists only in the mind of one old man, in a village you can no longer reach? What happens when he dies? A library burns to the ground, a library of memory built not of stone or paper, but of whispers passed from one generation to the next. The final connection to a living empire, gone. But here is where the story gets strange. As one library burns, another is being built. The satellite images from 2011 were the first new page. The DNA analysis by Stefania Sarno's team in 2017 was a new chapter. We are now the ones piecing together the story. We are becoming the elders. For the first time, the story of the Garamantes isn't just being remembered, it's being reconstructed using a language of genetic markers and spectral imaging they could never have imagined. Think about what that means. We are reading their history from their bones, long after their words have faded. This changes everything. The history of Africa, so often written by outsiders, is finally being told by the continent itself, by its soil, its water, its blood. The Garamantes prove that the Sahara was never an empty space. It was not a barrier between a civilized north and a primitive south. That's a story told on European maps. The reality was a corridor, a place of exchange, of power, of empires that rose and fell on their own terms. And this is the part nobody likes to admit. The standard history of civilization has huge gaping holes, whole chapters torn out. The Garamantes are not an exception. They are a warning, a 400,000 square kilometer warning that what we think we know about the past is just the set of stories we've chosen to repeat. But what about the stories we've chosen to ignore? How many other kingdoms lie sleeping under the sand, awaiting for a satellite to glance in the right direction? We look at a desert and see emptiness, a jungle and see wilderness, an ocean and see a void. But these are just failures of our own imagination. They are places filled with the ghosts of human ambition. The Garamantes taught their children the language of the stars to cross a sea of sand. Today, we use stars of our own, our satellites, to find our way back to them. Their story is not an ending. It is an invitation.